Do you think there are better and worse ways to experience altered states?
I'll take anything that works. Sure. I mean, when you back off again and kind of look at an overall integral view, there are several things you want to take into account. States that help balance the quadrants are helpful. If you're getting into states of consciousness that are hurting or downplaying the we or the it dimension, that's not good. If you're getting into states of consciousness that are just induced by chemicals in a way that the deleterious effects of the chemicals are catching up with you, that's not good. Certain states can start out and be very freeing and liberating, but if you sort of get into a rut with those, then they stop being that. And in that sense, they almost become constricting because you think that you have this state that's ultimate God or whatnot, and it's actually just a very kind of limited view, and that can start to catch up with you. That's not a good thing.
So to put examples with what you're talking about, the first one was the diminishment of the we domains. What would be an example of how people go into altered states where that's accomplished?
A lot of people get into meditative states, and start neglecting everything on the exterior world. They can neglect action in the world. They can neglect environmental concerns. They can neglect their family, their spouse, their sons, their daughters, and so on. And it's a notorious pitfall of the meditative path, because part of what you're doing is you are following this thread to the self-supreme. And so there's an enormous pull. There's a magnet. There's an attraction there that's just, sublime, exquisite. But until that ultimate realization, which will then embrace all of these other domains, you can end up excluding them in a very, very rigid way. And if that happens, basically so much of your life falls apart that you can hardly pursue meditation either. So again, it's sort of a little bit more integral approach. Doesn't mean you have to, again, master all of these other areas. Just means you have to sort of keep an eye on them, not overdo one so much that you're causing damage or pathology in the other areas. Most frequently, it's relationships. And secondarily, probably actual work in the world, jobs, for example. So all of these have to be kept in mind. It's a real problem, and there's the downside is just kind of a gross version of it. But drug addiction is a very classic addiction to altered states, and the states themselves are kind of a good in themselves. I mean, the heroin addict's blissful rush is a real taste of certain potentially extraordinary realms, but done in a way that guarantees disaster, because it's really not taking all the quadrants, all the other dimensions into account, and therefore it really is going to cause trouble, as it does very, very soon. Psychedelics themselves, if they are used exclusively as a spiritual path, my experience about that is that the people that do best are ones who combine an occasional psychedelic experience as a kind of eye-opener with some sort of spiritual practice that doesn't rely on that. And people that use just psychedelic substances tend to sometimes get into almost a kind of deadened space. It's like they've seen so much of the subtle realm cinema show that it's just become kind of jaded in a certain sense. And also, the permanent realization on psychedelics, to my knowledge, doesn't occur. I've never seen anybody that's achieved a permanent realization, because that demands development, basically, and not merely altered states. So you can get some very, very profound breakthroughs, but they tend to be transitory and temporary. And when people keep going back to the drug for it, then sooner or later the toxic effects of the drug often overweigh the benefits of it. And a lot of the worldviews that I see them producing are neurological noise from the toxic byproducts, as far as I can tell. And so you have to be careful about that. And they'll love me for saying that. But
So are there any methods for accessing altered states besides meditation that you think pass the integral test?
Well, let's put it this way. Any technique can pass the integral test if you include it as part of an integral program, including drugs. So it's not that a technique or a state itself is integral. Anything can be a part of an integral overall package. You just put it in part of the integral overall package, and no technique itself is integral. Every technique specializes in something. So what you want when you have an integrally informed practice is you can say, for example, okay, I am going to do this particular psychedelic And I'm going to do it because I understand what's happening. It's going to be a temporary experience. I'm going to get these various insights, but then I'm going to try to make it part of an ongoing, more integrally informed practice. So I might take up other types of altered state-inducing techniques. It could be Stan Grof's holotropic breathing exercises. It could be various types of yoga. Some people get altered states, many people get altered states through sports, intense exercise, jogging. These are all valid means of doing that. But if you don't have some way to take all of those and make it part of an ongoing developmental practice, then they're just going to remain temporary passing states, which can be wonderful, but it's not going to really bear down on your overall growth and development in terms of acquisition of these as a permanent trait. And again, all of these things help to shake loose your identification from what it is that you think you are. Because every identification we have, what we call ourself, is something that you can actually see or be aware of. If you actually look at yourself right now and say, this is what I am, this is what I want, those are all objects. That's not what you are. Those are all objects you can see. They're not the seer. Anything that you can see about yourself is not who you really are. It's a mistaken identity, a bad case of mistaken identity. And any time that you have a state change that shakes loose that narrower identity, it makes it ever more likely that you're going to find your real identity, which is this ever-present I amness, this vast openness in which everything's arising moment to moment. So anytime you're shaken loose from an identification with one of the shadows on the cave, you're more likely to find the light. And that's what altered states do so well, as long as they're, again, part of an ongoing overall approach to this.